So I'm just going to do a one take video about this New Balance Beacon V2. I'm not really going to edit anything, so if I make mistakes, I'm just going to go back over and just say stuff again, so apologies in advance. I was, for some reason, thinking about this shoe the other day because I saw it, I still own it, right? And it just seems like everybody talked so positively about the Beacon back when it was first coming out. What was it? 2018, 2019, something like that. Maybe even 2017. I'm not for sure. But it's quite an old shoe at this point. And I just remember everybody absolutely loving the shoe. And my big quandary was people were always talking about, it felt like they were talking about how much cushion this had relative to its weight, or at least how much stack it has relative to its weight. It's like a mid 7-ounce shoe and a men's size 9. And it's, you know, by today's standards, it's obviously not that tall, but back then shoes weren't like super tall yet. We weren't doing this whole like everything is a max cushion shoe. I mean, even the Rebel is now borderline a max cushion shoe. It's like mid 30s in terms of stack height, which mid 30s 5 years ago was like super max stack, and now mid 30s is a up tempo daily trainer like the Rebel. But I decided to compare it against a shoe that's only slightly more modern, the Rebel V2. So I took the shoe out and I did a 2-mile run in it. Nothing crazy, because to me this has never been a distance shoe. It's always been firm. Even back then for me it was quite firm. Where it really shined was the weight, and it does have kind of a more dialed in fit. So I kind of revisited that. It's a contact EVA, which is the entire midsole and the outsole, which kind of reminds me of shoes like the Mach. So I brought the Mach out here because I feel like this, after running in it again, I thought it would be, you know, in terms of use case, you know, they kind of describe it how they would describe the Rebel of today. You know, the Rebel is that up-tempo, snappy, lightweight daily trainer. And that's really how they used to describe the Beacon, that snappy, lightweight, up-tempo daily trainer. So they had very similar descriptions, but after running in them back to back, you know, I did a 2-mile in one and 2-mile in the other. I actually find that the Hoka Mach 5 is actually much more similar in terms of the ride. It's a little bit heavier. The Rebel is much closer in the weight, but you have a much more, I feel like a much more effective rocker. And that's not always measured just by how steep the rocker is, but also by some other things as well. But also you have a lot of contact EVA outsole, which makes it, again, very similar to the old Beacon. I also brought out the old, what is this shoe? The Glide Ride, which is still one of my favorites of all time. You know, if they were to dial this back in terms of padding, I think it would be one of the most perfect shoes. It's a little bit heavy, but it doesn't feel heavy on foot because it's so smooth. But yeah, they just made a new version of this, thinking about getting it because I'm such a big fan of this one. And there were some things I noticed out on the run which made me want to bring this shoe out. I'll get to that in a minute. So anyways, I remember this shoe as being very firm, light. I used to wear a 9.5 because I like my shoes to fit super tight, and now dial that forward a little bit, a couple years, and now I don't like that so much. So now I wear 10s. So this is actually a little bit different. I've got one on one foot, one on the other. This is a 10 wide, and this is a 9.5 regular, and they both fit. In fact, they feel relatively the same, more or less, but the Rebel is obviously a little bit roomier, but you can always dial that in with laces. There is definitely a lace length difference. Rebel has a longer lace length, but as far as the ride goes, one of the things I was really surprised about comparing this to the Rebel is I actually find it easier to run at a pace. If you're trying to hit a pace, it's actually a lot easier in this shoe than it is in the Rebel. Now, I think that has a little bit to do with my weight. I'm not fat by any means, but I would definitely call myself heavy for a runner. I'm close to 200 pounds, which, you know, pretty heavy for a runner. And I think the Rebel has such a low density, such a squishy, spongy foam that at my weight, it's almost like running in sand. I think back when I was a little bit lighter, this shoe was a little bit more enjoyable to run in, and it certainly is still comfortable. And comparing the two, this is what I'll say. This is definitely overall still the more comfortable shoe, in that it's got a much softer foam, much softer foam, and it's about the same in terms of weight. I think it's actually slightly less weight, but they're more or less the same weight. They're like mid to low 7 ounces. There's not a whole lot of weight between the two of them. This upper is much more breathable. In fact, that layer that you see right there in between this heavier stitching, that's all it is. Like that's actually the footbed that you're seeing through that, because the footbed's also yellow. You can see the yellow shining through the upper. I never did a review on this shoe, but I've always really enjoyed it because it's so lightweight, it's so breathable, and it's so soft. And actually, this is one of the shoes I would still recommend to people today. Like, if you can find this on some kind of a discount, yeah, pick this up, especially for the price. It's interesting looking at it because I never know which side is actually more indicative of the height of the shoe. If you look at this side, the midsole stack actually looks quite tall. But if you look at this side, especially this thinned out area right here, just right here, it actually looks quite thin. And I don't know if this is closer to the real height or if this is closer to the real height, because this doesn't to me look like a wrapped up midsole where you're sitting in it. You know, that's not really that wide. It would seem more like you're sitting on that, but then this side is lower. And if you're comparing this side to the Beacon, they're about the same stack height. I don't have stats handy. The only thing I looked up was the weight between them. But in terms of how they feel, I have them both on right now. They feel about the same height. Obviously, there's a lot more foot movement in the Rebel because the Rebel's so much softer, and that foam moves a lot more in the Rebel. It's definitely a little bit, it's hard to describe stability because they're so different. You can see that the Rebel is actually wider through the midfoot, and this was a feature that they had in the V1, but the outrigger actually extends through the midfoot. Whereas you can see on the Beacon, it actually widens in the forefoot and then narrows through the midfoot. See, it's wide throughout. This is only wide in the front. You can see that outrigger stick out. The outrigger extends about to where you see that blue tab on the midsole. So the Rebel has a wider base, but then your foam is moving a lot more. So it definitely, I feel like I can feel the ground more in the Rebel compared to the Beacon. Although the Beacon transitions a lot faster because there's just really no squish to the shoe. And, you know, I was really surprised because I came back to the house and I did a flexibility test, because also some shoes, they get a lot of their pop just from how firm their midsoles are. So I did a quick check, and it's a little bit stiffer than the Rebel, but it's not as big as I thought. The Hoka is still the snapback king for a non-plated shoe. I mean, the Hoka, it really snaps back hard when you bend the toe, and you can feel that, and that's kind of what reminded me of this one. Like, the Hoka Mach 5 is basically, to me, this shoe, but so much better. The Rebel is quite a bit different than I was thinking. I thought they would be kind of close because of what I said earlier about them. They're both daily trainers. They're both lightweight. They're both supposed to be protective sort of things. But this shoe turns over so much faster than the Rebel that naturally I found myself wanting to sit at a slightly faster pace. I still was able to kind of cruise slow-ish. I mean, I was doing, 8 to 9 minute miles. I wasn't trying to burn it up. I just wanted to get a couple miles in both just to see how they felt. But I found myself less comfortable at slow paces in this and more comfortable. It feels much more natural when you just let it kind of roll through, when you just kind of let it deflect. And it actually feels softer. Now, when I first took it out, my initial thoughts was, wow, this thing is firm. And then I don't know if the shoe just needed to get beaten back in or something, but it did feel a little bit softer towards the end of the run. Not a huge difference, but it actually wasn't that bad. And I think it's, you can really get impact absorption, in my opinion, through two things. And New Balance has always been about at least one of these things, and that's midsole geometry and midsole compound. The geometry of this is doing a lot of the work. And for a little bit of shoe history, for those of you who are maybe relatively new to the shoe game, Fresh Foam used to get all of its properties from geometry. It's basically just EVA. Now, the modern compositions of Fresh Foam are actually much better than this. But what's happening is you can see that these are concaved. I think I'm saying that right. Concave, they're concaved inwards, whereas these are convexed outwards, inwards, outwards. And so what this was actually supposed to do is kind of like a stability shoe. If you take away material, this compresses more where there's less material. Whereas when you add in more material, and you can see it's back to being concave there, and right in this little medial post area where you would typically see like a plastic plate on a shoe like a Saucony Guide, for example, they have concaved it outwards or convexed it. I don't know, one of the two, right? But you can see that material sticking outward rather than inwards. And that was how they used to always get their cushion, was actually, and then they started micro perforating it in some of the later versions of the 1080s before they moved into just better midsole foam. It was all about how you cut the foam. But anyways, so a little bit of an aside there, but as far as like how this just rolls, it really transitions a lot faster than the Rebel. And I think it's because, and I shot some B-roll, so I'll be able to maybe show some of that, but it feels to me like the Rebel, because it's so soft, it really wants to flatten out. Like when I put my weight down, this shoe loses that rocker shape. It has a rocker shape right now, but when I put my weight down and my weight's in my heel and my weight's in my toes, the shoe almost probably goes flat. And I don't know if I can show this with one hand, but it's almost like the shoe kind of flattens itself outward a little bit like that. And it definitely felt like I had to work harder in this shoe. I think I ran about the same pace. I actually forgot my watch today, so I didn't get to time the runs. So I'll never know, but they felt about the same pace. But I definitely felt like I was working harder in the shoe. And that kind of gets into one of the things that I like to talk about with shoes is like, I think that and what's funny is I actually found out today that this is a holographic thing. I didn't know. I've had this shoe since launch and I never knew that, but whatever. But there's so much more to comfort than just how soft it is. There's also, to me, comfort in terms of how fun the shoe makes running, you know, how engaging it makes running. Like that kind of like eases your mind in terms of how good you feel about the run, you know, when it feels good and it's fun and it's snappy. There really isn't. I would say the Hoka Mach 5 is what this shoe tried to be. Now the modern iterations of it, the Rebel V3, the Rebel V4 might be different, but I'm just talking about the V2 because that's the one I have. And I still really like the shoe, especially for casual wear. You know, if I might do a light run and then want to walk around in the shoe, it is really soft, really breathable upper. I like it for that. But there's cushion, there's how fun it makes it, and then finally there's how much the shoe helps you. Obviously, you see a lot of help now with the rockered shoes and the plates and all that. And actually, I don't think this shoe is very helpful at all as far as like doing the work for you. Now, for daily work, for miles, you know, you're just trying to get the work in, build the muscles, all that. This is great. As far as you're going to get a lot of the work yourself, the shoe isn't going to do it for you. But man, that run just wasn't nearly as easy as it was in the Beacon. The Beacon is still a faster running shoe naturally to this. That doesn't mean it's a better running shoe. This is softer. This is, I don't know, just overall a better upper. It's about the same in terms of how the fit is, although the types of fit are very different. This material is much more pliable than the Beacon. The Beacon's material has more rigidity to it. Neither of them are stretchy materials, but this one just moves a lot easier, so it feels a little bit, I guess, less structured. The heel, this little red piece you see through the mesh, this is hardened, but it's not very big at all. It's really just almost like a quarter size hardened plastic, and then it gets real thin outside of that, whereas the Beacon's got a little bit more of a substantial heel. This, I think, will fit more people because it's cushioned. So once you start cinching it down, the padding of this will wrap around the foot a little bit more, whereas the Beacon, it's basically, I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like a neoprene type upper, a hardened neoprene. There's got the little pillows, but this piece right here, there's not really any padding to it. So it's like, if it's shaped to your foot, fantastic. It actually fits my foot really well. Although I heard some other people talk about heel slip. I have no such heel slip, but that's, it could just be luck of the draw that this thing just fits my foot perfectly. But it definitely feels like a more locked in fit because the materials, here, let me go back to this. The materials aren't nearly as pliable. They're a little bit thicker, a little bit denser. Neither of them stretch, like I said, and that heel is a lot more rigid. And it's rigid at a further distance. Like it's rigid all through here. Now it does bend some if you squish it, but it's just that the hardened components is basically everywhere that you see this, whatever this is, I don't know, whatever that is, everywhere that you see that, it's a little bit more rigid. Whereas the Rebel, it's really just in the very, very back of the shoe, and then the rest is like basically just mesh. And obviously this foam is a lot squirrelier. I mean, it really compresses and bobbles when you're running. You may love that, you may not. That outrigger helps a bit. It doesn't, like, it gives you peace of mind, but it still doesn't feel more stable just because this foam does wobble a lot. And I know that a lot of companies now, they're actually just putting plates into shoes just to tame these super soft foams. Like when you put a foam that's this soft into a shoe, you really have to find some way to kind of tame it and keep it from just bobbling all over the place. Actually, I think that's a big part of the reason why shoes like the Saucony Endorphin Speed have a plate. I really feel like it's less so to bring it in line with the super shoe and more so to just give something to that trainer to where that foam isn't just wobbling all over when you're trying to run in it. If I'm not mistaken, the Rebel V1 actually had a plate. A lot of people never got to try that shoe. I did. I used to have a Rebel V1. I gifted it to somebody. But it actually had a small, like 3/4 length plastic plate in it. And I believe they removed that for the V2. I don't think it has the plate anymore. Durability is quite a bit better on the Rebel. I've probably ran in them about the same, even though I've not really run in neither of these shoes lately. Actually, I've run in this one this year because I still really like it. But I've kind of like left the Beacon in the closet for the last 3 years or so. But I decided to break it out and run in it. But yeah, I think in total I have probably about the same amount of miles in them. But the Rebel is holding up quite a bit more. Obviously, it's got a lot more rubber coverage, which it needs it because this foam is so soft, it would get chewed up by the asphalt. And the parts of the exposed foam that is there, it actually isn't bad because I think the rubber coverage is sufficient. I also tend to be more of a mid-ish to 4-foot-ish runner, although I may be misled by that, or maybe I've changed over the years because I've had this foam. I've had the Beacon for years now, and I've noticed that I've actually worn down. You know, they used to be really sharply cut, and you can see, let's see, you see how defined the shape used to be right here in this foam area? Look at down here in the corner. Again, this is on the outer corner, so this would be like your landing area if you're a heel striker. Maybe I did used to heel strike, I don't know, but lately I'm more of a 4-foot striker and a mid-foot striker, but this evidence is telling me I used to be a heel striker, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, all in total, not as comfortable, not as breathable, about the same weight. It feels nimbler because it bounces. It doesn't bounce. Let me correct myself. But it just transitions a lot faster, and it feels like it wants to roll more. Even though this isn't a heavily rockered shoe, it feels more rockered than the Rebel, or at least I think it holds on to its rocker a bit more because this foam is firmer. And since the foam is firmer, it's not really flattening out, so it's keeping that roll. And that's one of the things that I mentioned about the the Asics Glide Ride is that that plate in there almost maintains the integrity of the rocker throughout the roll, and because it has it, it always feels rockered. Where some shoes have the rocker, but once you put your weight in them, you're really flattening the shoe out to the point where it might as well not have one. But yeah, this one still felt a bit more nimble. It felt more comfortable at faster paces. Not comfortable. What I'm trying to say is this felt more at home at faster paces. It doesn't feel like it's in its natural habitat at like 10-minute pace, for example. That doesn't feel great in this, but surprisingly not bad. I do think it's actually a better overall shoe if you needed pace, right? You got to hit some numbers and something, and you, for whatever reason, you were between the Rebel and the Beacon. I would say the Beacon probably is more capable of hitting those numbers, unless you're really lightweight. If you're really lightweight, maybe the sponginess of the Rebel isn't that big of a deal to you. But if you're on the heavier side, or you're just a, quote unquote average runner, then maybe the difference is a bit more noticeable to you, like it is for me. But yeah, the short verdict: not as comfortable, not as breathable. Still feels good today. It's quite firm, but it rolls through quite well. Very consistent. You don't really feel much. Sorry, there was a mosquito. You don't really feel much difference from heel to toe. It does feel very similar throughout the whole ride, whereas this feels weird. The heel, whoops, there it goes. The heel feels quite narrow, which it is. The heel is quite narrow, and then the forefoot's quite wide, and the heel wobbles a bit more. So it's weird. If you land in the heel on this, it feels very different than if you land in the forefoot. If you land in the heel and the Beacon, it just feels like you're starting further back in the same stride. Whereas if you land in the heel on this, you get a much different sensation than if you're landing midfoot, forefoot. Durability goes to this one. Breathability goes to this one. Weight goes to this one. Cushion goes to this one. I think it runs a little bit better at slower paces, but it doesn't feel like it's as assistive. It feels like you got to work harder in the shoe, but I don't know. It's tough to determine which of these is actually better, because I think some people, if they're just trying to hit those numbers and they want a shoe that helps them hit the pace, that's actually the Beacon. It's actually the Beacon over this. Not that anyone asked. I'm waiting for the comment that just says, "Hey, bro, absolutely no one asked for this video." Okay, that's fine. Whatever. But I'm showing it anyways because I just decided to pull out the Beacon because I saw somebody mention it. I was thinking about it, so I said, you know what? We're going to pull it out and see what people were talking about. But anyways, that has been the video. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.